I'm going to call the hearing to order, and before I recognize myself, I want to mention a few things on this week's activities and schedule. This is a very busy and historic week, and full House representatives, as we know. We also have important work to do in the subcommittee. Today we are finally giving our friends of the EPA a chance to provide their progress report on the e-manifest program. The agency has waited patiently as we have been compelled to postpone today's hearing twice for scheduling reasons beyond our control. But the day is finally here, and we've always planned we will hear from a single witness and only one panel. As the testimony submitted has not changed from the first scheduled time for this hearing, our questions will be pretty much the same as well. Tomorrow we have two activities, a hearing on the management of low-level nuclear waste and a subcommittee mark of the Senate's Rural Water Technical Assistance Authorization. The hearing is an important step as we all study the intricacies of the entire nuclear waste issue. This is another in a series designed to give members a sound understanding of all the facts of this challenge so that we are on solid footing to act legislatively when that time comes. Finally, at the request of Mr. Pallone, we will give subcommittee members a chance to vote on the Senate Rural Water Technical Assistance Bill. This is the bill we had a hearing on last week and which passed the Senate unanimously. If we can see clearly to pass it without amendment on a strong bipartisan basis, we can make it into law. And in doing so, we must thank subcommittee ranking member Mr. Tonko and our vice chair Mr. Harper for their leadership in getting us this far on the rural water technical assistance. To my knowledge, there is no substantive opposition to the bill, and most, if not all of us, look forward to helping our constituents by advancing the bill to the President without amendment. I am proud of the subcommittee members. We work hard in the subcommittee in a bipartisan spirit. We have much work left to accomplish in this Congress, so I'm glad members are willing to maintain this consistent level of effort to achieve that. And I just wanted to make sure that we started understanding that we're pushing it pretty hard on the subcommittee. So with that, I'd like to recognize myself 5 minutes for an opening statement. The subcommittee is in order. This morning's hearing focuses our panels on EPA's implementation of the electronic program to receive, store, and make publicly available manifests of hazardous waste. Creation of this system has been something that EPA, the regulated industry, and the environment advocacy groups have supported for quite some time as a way of modernizing this carbon-copied, paper-clogged system that's currently in place. 3 years ago, enthusiasm was high for taking this Solid Waste Disposal Act requirement into the 21st century. In September 2012, Congress came together with solid bipartisan majorities to permit EPA to collect the fee needed to set up the system EPA wanted to operate. I think we all believed that not only would EPA be able to continue tracking hazardous waste destined for treatment, storage, or disposal, but the new system provided the collateral benefits of increased transparency, access to critical information for first responders, reduced reporting errors, and greater accountability of waste management. EPA asked for, and we gave them 3 years to get the system up and running. Working through some thorny funding concerns, we authorized the money to make this happen. There was no reason to believe the system would not be operational within that time frame. That was then. 3 years ago, yesterday marked 3 years from the date of enactment of the Hazardous Waste Electronic Manifest Act. Under the law, EPA was supposed to have moved from the system creation phase to its actual deployment, but the system is not ready for prime time. Moreover, while the EPA has been given $7.4 million to get this system going, $1.4 million more than the Congress authorized through fiscal year 2015, the President's fiscal year 2016 budget request now calls for another $7.4 million to finish building the system. Yet, because the law assumed EPA would have the system working by now, the law's authorization has expired, and its user fees are unavailable until the electronic manifest system is working. We all know there isn't spare federal money lying around, and it is easy disqualifier for further funding if there is not a current authorization. If this system is going to survive, it's up to the agency to help us get to to the bottom of what is going on here, and if merited, make the case to others that e-manifest launch needs further authorization and more funding. I know EPA hasn't been sitting on its hands the last 3 years, but we need a full accounting of what it has been doing and what still needs to be done. Ultimately, we need to know why it's taking so long, why it's costing so much, and if the EPA gets its requested funding, will this system actually be usable? I welcome our witness from the Environmental Protection Agency, Barnes Johnson. I appreciate your coming here to share your experience and the insight on the agency's efforts. We are glad that you are here and hope you will see us as a partner in trying to make the system run as well. I will now, seeing if any other member on our side wants any time, seeing none, I now yield back my time and yield to the ranking member, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Thank you and welcome, Mr. Johnson, for testifying before the committee this morning. I believe we all agree that an electronic system for tracking hazardous materials will promote greater safety, more accurate record keeping, and certainly lower costs. The agency appears to be moving forward steadily to meet the requirements of the 2012 legislation and to get the system up and running. And I look forward to hearing more about the status of this program. And again, thank you for your testimony, Director Johnson. Since I still have a few minutes, I believe I have to express my disappointment that the subcommittee is holding a hearing on this topic. There are many more pressing issues that require our attention, like drinking water infrastructure, brownfields, environmental justice, emergency environmental response, chemical security, electronic waste, just to name a few topics. We've spoken often enough for you to know that drinking water infrastructure is at the top of my list. There are serious threats to drinking water systems in towns and cities across our great country. With the exception of the problem in Toledo, Ohio, we've never held hearings on the problems related to source water quality, contamination, drought, or emergency response procedures. Instead, we are investing our time here examining the e-manifest program, a program that I believe is underway, has received adequate funding to make progress, that is moving forward at a steady pace. I wish other programs were doing as well. I realize this committee had a concern about whether the appropriators would continue to fund the e-manifest program adequately in the next fiscal year. But at this point, it is clear that we're not going to pass a freestanding interior approps bill. That's a benefit in my view because the bill has too many cuts to vital programs and too many bad policy riders. That bill offered funding far too low to meet real domestic needs. Lack of adequate funding is an issue for all programs, not just e-manifest. The proposed Interior Appropriations Bill cut more than $700 million as compared to this year's funding for EPA. Much of that comes from the state and tribal assistance grants, money that goes to the states and to local governments to ensure that we have clean air and have clean water. The Appropriations Committee proposed a cut to the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund of some $150 million. That's compared to this year's funding. It is $429 million lower than the President's request. This cut stands in stark contrast to current infrastructure assessments and to what we've heard from witnesses about the needs of water utilities at the 2 hearings we did hold on drinking water technical assistance programs. We should be exploring solutions that will help public water systems that are struggling with the tremendous backlog of work. Continuing to provide clean, safe, affordable drinking water to everyone in our nation is essential for public health for a given purpose and for economic prosperity. There is very little time left in this first session. There are challenges common to all of our districts. E-manifest does not come close to being on that top of the list. I hope the subcommittee will take up some of our other big issues, our bigger issues that are of concern to all of our constituents. Working together productively, we can deliver progress on many issues and create jobs in the process. Members on our side of the aisle are anxious to do that, and with that, I again thank you, Director Johnson, for appearing before the subcommittee today. Thank you for your work to get the e-manifest program moving forward, and look forward to your comments.
The gentleman yields back his time. Just for my colleague, you know, e-manifest is my legislative baby, don't you? Right?
Okay.
So I'd like to turn now to the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Harper, for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Do you have anything? Okay. Anybody else on the Republican side? Anyone on the Democrat side? No. Seeing none, we would like to welcome Mr. Johnson from the EPA here. Your full testimony is entered in the record. You have 5 minutes, and obviously we're not going to be stringent on the time. Just we look forward to hearing you as we talk about this discussion on the e-manifest system. Welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I'm Barnes Johnson, Director of the Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery and the Office of Solid Waste and Emergency Response. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss our efforts to develop an e-manifest system. I want to thank you, Chairman Shimkus, and members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee for their successful bipartisan efforts to help enact e-manifest legislation. Subtitle C of the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act requires that EPA establish a manifest system to ensure that when hazardous waste leaves its point of generation, it arrives safely at a designated, permitted hazardous waste management facility. The manual processing steps associated with the current paper-based manifest system add up to a significant paperwork burden. As you know, the Hazardous Waste Electronic Manifest Establishment Act was signed into law nearly more than 3 years ago on October 5th, 2012. The Act directs the EPA to establish and implement an electronic manifest system. There are significant benefits to an e-manifest system, both in cost savings and program efficiencies. EPA has projected that an e-manifest system that handled 75% of the current manifest traffic could result in an annual net savings that exceeded $75 million. A number of other significant benefits are also expected. An e-manifest will produce better quality data and more timely information on waste shipments, make it possible to have improved tracking capabilities for waste shipments, and users will be able to rely on the National e-manifest system for manifest data reporting. The agency has been moving forward on key actions to implement the Act. The EPA has developed system architecture plans that focus on major aspects of the e-manifest system. The EPA worked extensively with commercial users on identifying and addressing their issues. The EPA has also met regularly with our state partner organizations. To realize significant benefits of an e-manifest system, a broad range of private and public sector stakeholders must use it. And to help ensure that use, the system must meet stakeholder needs. To accomplish this, the agency is relying heavily on available off-the-shelf software modules, conducting user-centered design and development, and is utilizing agile software development methodologies. This approach embodies continuous improvement through iterative development of operating software and testing, and continued regular engagement with users and stakeholders throughout the process to provide ongoing opportunities for input. In September 2015, the EPA, in partnership with GSA, completed an initial system demonstration. This focused on a key aspect of the system, the transaction at the end of the chain of custody when hazardous waste arrives at the designated waste management facility, and that facility signs the electronic manifest to verify that all hazardous waste types and quantities were received. Getting the system to properly electronically execute this all-important manifest transaction was an important first step for us. The EPA worked with several industry users to complete this initial system functionality. The agency will add more functionality in an incremental manner via modular contracting strategy. Research has shown that using this type of lean startup methodology with agile techniques lowers the cost of current and future system development by addressing uncertainties sooner rather than later. By spring of 2018, EPA expects to have fully deployed a working e-manifest system and to be collecting user fees to pay operation and maintenance costs. Besides system development, the agency has also made progress developing regulations to support the new program. The EPA published a final regulation in February of 2014 authorizing electronic manifests, and we're working towards a proposed user fee regulation that is quite far along. In addition, the e-manifest advisory board was established in August when EPA submitted the charter to Congress. The EPA appreciates the support of Congress in enacting legislation to authorize development of electronic waste management system, and looks forward to continued support to allow for further development, completion of a hazardous waste e-manifest system. We're committed to keeping Congress informed of our progress. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my prepared statement. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you or the subcommittee members may have about EPA's development of an e-manifest system.
Thank you very much. I'll now recognize myself 5 minutes for the first starting the questions. Before I do that, let me do a unanimous consent that members of the subcommittee have 5 legislative days to submit opening statements for the record. Without objection, so ordered. To date, $7.4 million has been appropriated for implementation and setup of e-manifest. This number is $1.4 million more than the legislation authorized, and the President requested in his budget. Can you tell us how much the agency expended on the e-manifest IT system and development so far from the fiscal year 14 and the fiscal year 15?
Yes, sir. So we have spent $2.5 million of the $7.4 on system development activities. We have spent another $1.4 on other non-system related e-manifest activities like regulatory development, establishment of the FACA, and so on. And we have $3.5 million that remains unspent.
Thank you. EPA's personnel expenditures, professional IT staff dedicated to the system work, were these new hires or people who only worked on e-manifest?
Okay, so we have 8 FTE that work exclusively on e-manifest, and they are a combination of new hires and people that that had worked at EPA for some time.
Are they paid out of the environmental program management funds?
No.
But they're paid out of
the $7.4 million that's been appropriated. Their salaries.
And what about contract expenditures for that same period?
So the contract expenditures that we've had for the same period that have come from the 7.4 have been exclusively used for e-manifest.
How much has been spent on additional expenditures associated with implementing the overall e-manifest act, such as personnel and contract expenses related to regulatory development? You kind of mentioned that earlier. E-manifest advisory board and other related activities.
So we've spent in total both personnel costs and other related costs with contractors on those 2 categories of $1.4 million.
And these funds all came out of the 7.
They all came out of the appropriated dollars.
Okay, great.
For e-manifest specifically.
As I understand it, EPA has 4.9. Well, that's a different number. You're saying there's 3.5 million left in your response.
At the beginning of the fiscal year, yes, sir.
Right. How much of that, so that means, I'm trying to get my math right here. Yeah, this is, how much of that 3.5 million was spent on personnel and contract expenses related to regulatory development? Okay.
So I'll go through the numbers again. So we've been appropriated 7.4.
Right.
So 2.5 million of that has been spent on system development. 1.4, and that includes both personnel and contract costs. 1.4 have been spent on non-system program-related expenditures, leaving 3.5.
Great.
So a total of 3.9 have been spent to date, and a portion of those expenditures are for personnel and a portion of them are for contract costs.
Very good. How much of the appropriated funds are currently well, I got that answer. Yeah. Currently unspent, and what are EPA's plans for them? Okay.
So there's currently 3.5 that was unspent at the beginning of the fiscal year, and we we have a lot of work ahead of us to do. So that 3.5 is going to be used for a variety of system development activities. Our next, as in sort of outlined in my written testimony, what we're really focused on right now is developing what in the IT world they call a minimum viable product in March. So our initial expenditures out of that 3.5 are going to be focused on delivering that minimum viable operating system by next spring.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pallone, do you want to do an opening statement?
Sure.
The chair recognizes Mr. Pallone for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I know we try to start at 15 minutes later, but it doesn't always work out. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, this hearing is one more in a long line of hearings that focus on small issues, while large and pressing issues remain unexamined and unaddressed. Our failing drinking water infrastructure, the backlog of Superfund sites in need of cleanup, and the backlog of brownfield sites in need of redevelopment are just a handful of items this subcommittee should be focusing on. These issues are important to the American people, to public health, to the environment, and to the economy. But the Republican majority on this committee is simply looking at the periphery. Last week's hearing focused on the small pot of technical assistance funding for drinking water systems, but not the big pot of infrastructure funding. Today's hearing focuses on a small pot of money to establish a hazardous waste manifest system, but not the funding needed to clean up sites contaminated with hazardous waste. And tomorrow's hearing will look at low-level nuclear waste, but not in service of real solutions for the large stores of nuclear waste putting communities at risk. And that is just in this subcommittee. If we look beyond, we see repetitive hearings to attack Planned Parenthood and women's health and other rehashing discredited legal arguments against the Clean Power Plan. This great committee should be holding hearings on climate change, on drinking water, on brownfields, and more. And I understand that we're having this hearing because the appropriators did not include funding for e-manifest in this year's Interior Environment Bill. But if members were to examine that bill, you'll see that the appropriators have cut funding for all sorts of important programs with bigger price tags and bigger impacts than e-manifest. Funding for brownfields grants was $35 million below the President's request. Funding for Superfund cleanups was $65 million below the President's request. Funding for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund was $429 million below the President's request. And those funding levels, I think, are unacceptable, and these are issues we should be addressing in our hearing today. And instead, we'll hear today about what EPA would do with $7 million to establish an e-manifest system. I suppose I should say a few words about the e-manifest system since it's the subject of the hearing. Adopting an electronic system is a good idea, and it should be funded. Users will see significant reductions in costs and the time it takes to comply with regulatory requirements. States will get better info more quickly and will avoid costs of data entry, and first responders will get better access to information about hazardous shipments, and so will the public. And the long-term benefits will far exceed the upfront costs. The appropriators, in my opinion, are being penny-wise and pound-foolish in cutting funding for this program, just as they are in failing to invest sufficient funds to address our backlog of contaminated sites and infrastructure repairs. So I hope this subcommittee can focus on these pressing issues in the coming months, and I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back time. Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the opportunity to highlight how EPA's lack of funding is affecting EPA's ability to do important work on behalf of our nation's well-being. Now, Director Johnson, the President's budget request for fiscal year 2016 included, as you made mention, the $7.4 million for e-manifest programming. Is that right?
Yeah, the 7.4 that we had discussed previously was the sum of the appropriations received in FY 14 and 15. The 7.4 is the President's request for 16.
Okay. And you talked about some of the priorities with resources you have now. What would additional priorities be on your list if these available funds are directed to the e-manifest program?
Yeah. So one of the things that the President's budget request in the last 2 fiscal years has done is to try to put forward a figure that would really take funding uncertainties out of the question. I can't underscore enough for the committee how difficult it is to manage in the face of extreme funding uncertainties for a large system that EPA estimates is probably going to cost in the neighborhood of $16 million to build. And so the President's budget has tried to take that out of the equation. We have a number of things that we have to do to build a system. The first thing that we're going to be doing is working towards developing what we refer to as a minimum viable product in early next year, and part of that will involve working with user authentication. We'll be developing security infrastructure around the software. We'll be implementing quality assurance and quality control procedures for the data that are coming in. We're going to be focusing on the transaction that occurs at the designated facility at the TSD. This is the location that involves the least number of people but the most number of users. So we think it's a very critical part of the system functionality. We're going to be basically developing that portion of the system between now and next spring. When we do that, that will be a core set of capability that we can then add additional modules to. So after we get past next spring, then we'll be going into other areas, like, for example, other modes of transportation. We'll initially focus on truck traffic. We'll be moving into the rail arena. We'll be adding bandwidth to the system. Its ability to, have to remember, we may be receiving up to 25,000 manifests a day is a potential receipt. So we have to have the bandwidth, the physical infrastructure. There's a number of additional build-out capabilities that we'll need to do as we go beyond that core system into the larger system.
Thank you. And that functionality of which you speak is directly related to the House response. And unfortunately, the House Republican appropriators recommended that eManifest programming receive no funding in fiscal year 2016. And even worse, eManifest is only one of many programs that will seriously be underfunded if the House Republican majority gets its way. So, for example, funding for drinking water infrastructure, which is a pressing need for communities across our country, would fall drastically short of what the President has requested. And as I said in my opening statement, this year's proposal, or the proposed cut funding for the drinking water SRF by $150 million below this year's funding is a concern, and by $429 million below the President's 2016 budget request. With a backlog in infrastructure needs estimated at $387 billion, this proposal falls far short of what we should be investing. So, Director Johnson, I know that drinking water infrastructure is not managed by your office, so I won't ask you how these dramatic cuts would affect EPA's ability to ensure safe drinking water. But I do think we all know that these funding levels will mean more deferred maintenance, more water main breaks, more boil water advisories, and generally more disruption for communities across the country. What I will ask you is whether in general you think the EPA's mission is important and what your support is giving the agency toward the resources necessary to protect human health and the environment.
Yes.
I mean,
absolutely.
Your agenda obviously speaks to that mission, and what I'm hearing here is that you'll be falling short of the appropriations required to do your work.
I'm not from the drinking water program, so I can't
Right.
and not familiar with the particulars of that. I'm from the waste program, but I mean, I obviously come here with a great deal of passion and support of EPA's mission to protect human health and the environment. And I think that's something we all at EPA are trying to do.
Mm-hmm. I thank you. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee, Mr. Harper from Mississippi, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here and to lend your expertise. I think think it would be safe to say that you believe this issue is very important that you're here testifying on, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And I don't think you would say this is a small issue, as others have referred to. It's certainly very important to you and what you have to do.
It's important. It's important to me. I have to deliver the product here.
All right. The monitoring current paperwork that you have on manifests, how many items are done each day? How many new, when you have a transport done, how many are you having to monitor and track right now just doing your regular paperwork?
Okay, so the manifest system, the way it operates now, there are somewhere on the order of 3 to 5 million manifests that are managed in the country every year.
And when you're doing that, you're having to also notify local law enforcement, perhaps, or the state authorities when there is something of particular significance, correct?
So as part of the manifest system, there is formal notification of the states that occurs as part of the processing of the manifest.
And when we move into this e-manifest system, is that going to be a real-time transaction? Is that the purpose of that? So that when it's done, who will have access to that?
So the way we are thinking is at the moment is that it's going to be very similar to when you have a package at the postal, you send a package to the postal service, you go on the web and you can see the last transaction point. We're expecting to have a very similar kind of availability of information to the individuals who have shipped the waste, to the individuals that are handling the waste in transit, to the individuals that are receiving the waste on the end, as well as the states that are at the origin of the waste, where it's transported through, and the end point. All of those individuals should have access to the transaction as it occurs if it's handled through the e-manifest system.
And if you're looking at, obviously it's an electronic system, therefore it's subject to cyber attacks, and you have to have that security system built into that. Are you satisfied with the progress that's being made on that at this point today?
I am satisfied. We are going to be using the standard cyber security protocols and building to those criteria. We have hired a security expert to join our team recently. So it's an area that I think many who work with IT systems are keenly aware of, and something that we too are focused on.
You know, at the heart of this, obviously, is public safety, is how we protect the public during the transport of hazardous materials and solid waste.
Right.
And so at this point, do you believe that the development of the system is on track? Are you satisfied with where it is today?
I am satisfied with where it is today.
All right, and there are, of course, $3.5 million remains of that money. How much do you believe will be used of that 3.5 to continue with that system development? I know you have multiple needs for that money at this point that's unused, but what do you, and you said the total cost that you think to get this system up and running was how much?
$16 million is our present estimate at the moment.
And that's over what period of time?
That's between now and April of 18, or spring of 18, when we intend to deliver the system. And that'll be the point in time when we can start collecting fees and recover all of the dollars that have been appropriated.
And has every appointment been made of the advisory board?
We have established the advisory board, and I would say within the next month to month and a half, we will be notifying the individuals that we have selected for the board.
And 3 of those come from the states.
3 of them come from the state.
Who makes that selection? Are you making that selection?
We have a panel. We have a set of criteria based on the particular criteria that are in the statute, and we have a team that make a recommendation for the selection. And
is the panel all within the EPA or private industry, or all within the government? The
selecting panel is all within EPA. However, members of the board themselves, of course, per the Act, come from the IT industry, come from the waste handling industry, and come from the states.
Okay, the 3 states, will they be selected as the criteria from each from a different region, or they come from a particular background? Will any of them be industry related, or they all be where will they come from?
They have self-nominated and put forward their background and their experience, And so we will look at what they've put forward in their application and use that to make a decision about how to, which ones to select. And certainly, geographic distribution is certainly one of the criteria.
Thank you. Over my time, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned during my opening statement, I support the e-manifest program and think it should be funded. Perhaps better tracking of hazardous waste will mean less contamination of our land, but towns and states across the country are already dealing with a large backlog of sites contaminated with hazardous waste and other pollutants, and I don't understand why we're holding a hearing about $7 million for the e-manifest program and ignoring the tens of millions of dollars needed to clean up contamination. The Brownfields program, which has historically received bipartisan support, promotes job growth, protects the environment, and safeguards the health of our communities. However, the funding for brownfields continues to decrease. In fiscal year 2015, EPA received $80 million for the brownfields program, $5 million lower than the requested funding level. For fiscal year 2016, the President's budget recommends an additional $30 million for a total of $110 million. However, the appropriators have recommended only $75 million for the brownfields program, even lower than the funding level enacted in fiscal year 2015. So, Mr. Johnson, am I correct that these funding levels fall far short of what was included in the President's budget?
Yep, Mr. Pallone, I am, of course, the director of the EPA's waste programs. I'm not with the Brownfields and Superfund program, but my understanding of the information that you just expressed is consistent with my understanding. I know the President's FY16 budget proposal came in with increases for both Superfund and Brownfields, so that those programs could deliver the great work that they do in terms of job creation, economic redevelopment, and protecting our communities. And having worked in the Superfund program myself for more than 7 years as deputy director of the remedial program at EPA, I sort of understand that firsthand. And I also know firsthand that those programs are exceptionally scalable and have shown in the past that when additional funds are appropriated, they deliver great benefit to the communities that they serve.
Well, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Let me ask about e-manifest. If EPA does not receive funding for this work in fiscal year 2016, will development and implementation of the system be delayed?
If we so if we don't receive money in FY16, that it will certainly jeopardize the velocity with which we can go forward.
Okay.
And we are constantly juggling the speed at which we're able to do system development based on what we think is the availability of funds.
Well, more generally, when Congress fails to fund EPA programs like e-manifest or brownfields, can we expect implementation to happen on schedule or even to happen at all?
Well, we certainly can't keep our schedules up if we don't have the funding that's needed.
All right, thanks. I mean, it just seems to me that Republicans in the House want to cut funding every year, and then they complain that the EPA is falling behind. If we value toxic waste cleanups, drinking water infrastructure, and other EPA initiatives that protect human health, the environment, and the economy, we should ensure sufficient funding. And I think these are issues that matter to the American people. I know they matter to my constituents, and they should matter to the majority. So I hope we can focus more on these issues moving forward, Mr. Chairman, and I yield the balance.
Would the gentleman yield for 1 second?
Yes.
So, and I think that's part of the kind of the debate we're actually having this morning in the conference we're going to have on the floor, I think, tomorrow in the Bipartisan Budget Act agreement with the administration. The revised non-security will go from $493 billion to $518 billion. That's fiscal year 2016. In fiscal year 2017, the revised non-security dollars will go from $531 billion. So there's going to be more money for the revised non-security if the budget agreement, and it's 2 years, which would mean there'd be some certainty. So we'll see what happens on the floor, but that's what they're
Well,
trying
we hope we get a big vote from the Republican side tomorrow.
I wouldn't bet a big one, but so thank you, and I yield to my colleague, Mr. Murphy from Pennsylvania, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. This is a fascinating process to me. I know in western Pennsylvania we have a great deal that also results from mining, from fracking, nuclear areas, and these are all issues of medical waste, et cetera. All these things need to be tracked. Just a couple questions I have on this. I'm trying to understand this whole system. Can you walk me through how this all works, the computer systems, the architecture of this? And so I've heard you say in your testimony, you talked about how basically the manifest follows the trucks, correct? And even from that, it depends on someone to give the driver some of an accurate record of exactly what's in there. Am I correct? And that's all kept on computer files. And then that is turned over at the site of the waste site. Is there, how do we make sure that what is in that manifest is in what's in the truck?
Right.
Something real basic like that.
So I'll try to explain the way the system works today in the paper manifest, and then talk about how we hope that it will, and expect that it will operate in an e-manifest system. So today there's a 6-copy form that is used to create and document the chain of custody that occurs from the point of generation where the waste is first created, handed off to the transporter. The transporter then sends the material to the designated facility where it will be stored, treated, or disposed. And then that form is sent back to the generator so that the TSD at the end, the designated facility at the end, confirms that what the generator thought they sent to them actually made it.
And this is what you're saying can be up to 700,000 hours of paperwork.
Pardon me?
This is where, and you say that could be up to 700,000 hours of paperwork. It's pretty burdensome.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And there's a couple of copies go to the state where the generator is, the state where the receiving facility is. So that's how the paper manifest works today. The electronic manifest, this transaction will occur electronically. And so it will occur on mobile devices, perhaps, and there'll be, again, a chain of custody that occurs. EPA has a system called we refer to as the Cromer rule, but it basically is a system of user authentication that ensures that the person who signs the electronic device is actually the person of record. So we'll follow the exact same process that occurred.
You know, all those things in place so that, I mean, this is supposed to have been up and running a couple weeks ago. Are all the elements in place, or is there a specific list of items you have that still have to be done? And let me add to that, because we've had an Energy and Commerce Committee, a number of hearings on other electronic systems that were supposed to be up and running, and they weren't, and because the bugs were not tested before it was fully implemented. So I need to know, you can give me a list of some specific items yet to be ready, and then is EPA going to test this and do a test run of this too? Okay, yeah, all great questions. So the system is not up and running. We do have a key portion of the system that is up and running that we developed and got going that relates to that final transaction where the TSD confirms that what they received actually is that. So we have that piece, but we have to do the build out for the rest of the system. And so there's a number of pieces there that we have to work on. The transaction at the generator, the transporter. We have to have a system for paper processing. The we haven't talked about that, but the E-Manifest Act allows people to continue to do paper processing. We have to have interfaces so the states can access and acquire this data. We've been working very closely with the user community. We've been, shall I say, joined at the hip with a variety of waste management companies to learn the kinds of systems they already use so that we can have software components that speak directly with their existing software systems. So we have those pieces to build out. But we've been actually in very close and regular communication with the hazardous waste management industry on the structure and the functionality of this system. Learned a great deal from them. So in the final seconds I have left, I just want to make sure this is something So you've done some work on this, but any more test runs are going to be needed to?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The whole notion of what we're going to be doing is developing small pieces, testing them, develop small pieces, testing them, getting them out to the user. You know, one of the reasons why IT systems have failed in the past is that they're sort of really done in apart from the user community. And we are actually committed to every step of the way, working right alongside with our user community, having them test software in real time. In fact, the software that we developed in September is available to the public. We've given it to a number of members of the waste management community. They've given us immediate feedback on things we got wrong, things we need to improve. So we are staying very closely tied in with the user community.
What a great idea to develop that with the user community.
Yeah.
I hope other agencies use that. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for holding the hearing today. Like a lot of members, I'm disappointed that system's not up and running. Chairman Shivkins and I sponsored the e-manifest system when this subcommittee held hearings and supported passage of the Hazardous Waste Electronic Manifest Establishment Act. The e-manifest act was passed with strong bipartisan support from the industry, environmental community, because its benefits are so obvious. Reducing paperwork, lowering the administrative burden on regulators and industry, saving tens of millions of dollars annually, improving the tracking and management of our nation's hazardous waste. It's been over 3 years since e-manifest was signed into law. I'm pleased to get an update on the status and see what Congress and EPA can do to ensure that promised benefits of e-manifest are delivered as soon as reasonably possible. Maybe our subcommittee should have had some hearings earlier so we could get an update and see what the problem was. Mr. Johnson, the e-manifest system is projected to save over $75 million and thousands of hours per year once implemented. However, you mentioned some of the non-economic benefits of the new system. Can you elaborate on these non-economic benefits?
Yes, sir. So we expect a number of them. I think one of the great things will be the immediate accessibility to information. I think we'll have access to e-manifest information like we simply don't have right now. The e-manifest data, other than in some of the states that takes very special efforts to collect and acquire that information, we really don't have it at our fingertips. I think the quality control will be much improved. You have to realize there's over, I think, 270 data elements on up to 3 to 5 million of these transactions occurring every year. So being able to do much better quality control, I think, will have ripple effects through the hazardous waste management system and bring new accountability to the management of hazardous waste in general.
Can you describe who the primary stakeholders are on this issue and how you've involved them?
Absolutely. So our primary stakeholders, of course, are the states. We've worked very closely with a number of states, and particularly those states that have systems right now of acquiring manifest data through the paper system. We've been working very closely with that. Of course, the state association at SWAMO and ECOS we've been working very closely with. On the industry side, the whole transactional environment. So the generator community, the transportation community, as well as the treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. So we have been working with the Environmental Technology Council, which is an association that represents many of the larger hazardous waste management facilities. But we've been working with particular businesses like Safety Clean and other hazardous waste management facilities, working with them, working with their IT departments.
I represent a district in Houston. We have a number of the customers who would like to have that, and you mentioned some of them. How would lack of funding for fiscal year 2016 affect your ability to get the system online by 2017?
Well, I think it'll have an important adverse effect on us. I mean, we are really adjusting the velocity, the speed of our development activities based on the funding that we have available to us. And under the funding uncertainty that we're presently dealing with, we're being cautious in the speed at which we move forward.
Okay. Given the benefits this system offers, the costs to develop are more than justified. The same is true for much needed water infrastructure repairs, brownfield, Superfund funding. I share the concern voiced by our colleagues on this subcommittee in failing to address the big issues that have an impact on our working families. Congress must invest in our infrastructure before it fails, and I hope the subcommittee will focus on infrastructure needs in the coming months. And, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back my 38 seconds.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Johnson, for appearing here today. It's my understanding.
Would the gentleman yield for a second? Can you pull your mic a little bit closer? The gentleman from Texas cannot hear you, and he wants to.
It's my understanding that the total funding for this could be, you're saying, in the $16 million range?
We are presently estimating, based on what we know now, that the cost of the system to be $16 million.
Okay, so what's the what was your projection of the cost to have outsourced this?
Okay.
What could they have done in the private sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, one of the things that when the E-Manifest Act passed, we had the same sense of urgency that I'm feeling from the committee today.
Just what's the answer to the question? What do you think the outsourcing would have cost if you had done it with private sector?
We don't know.
Someone decided to do this in-house without having an
No,
idea.
the first thing that we did, the very first thing that we did was we went out and talked to every individual that had systems like eManifest. So the knee-jerk reaction, go talk to FedEx, talk to Amazon, talk to IBM, talk to all the big companies out there, the Postal Service.
Okay.
Go talk to these folks that track
several
things. We
questions.
went and talked to all of them.
If I could recant it. I'm concerned about this time because this was passed in 12 and it's 3 years later, and you're saying it may not be finished for 2 more years. So I think we got an issue here overall, whether it was good judgment or bad judgment as to try to do it in-house. And I think the GAO came out in its own report, has been very concerned about the use of in-house IT work right now. With numbers of cancellations. So
we're not going to be doing it
in-house,
sir.
Go back. I've only got 5 minutes.
Okay.
So Mr. Shimka has asked Mr. Rosinski back in 2012, how long do you think it's going to take to do this? And she said, if we use very conventional procedure approach, typically in the 12 to 18 months. That's 12 to 18 months. We're 3 years later, and you're saying it may be another 2 years to go. So. Was she wrong?
I believe she was responding to the length of time it takes to get a contract in place. When we too will be using, we are going to be using, you know, we're not going to be doing this in-house. We're going to be using contractors.
Implementing rules on that as well. So let me go a little further. I think you got a problem. It could be overfunding. It could be maybe just incompetency, perhaps, in taking this thing on. Because I don't know who your qualifications are people that are writing your specifications for this. Are these people that have failed on others? But are you using tech stacks?
Excuse me, sir?
Tech stacks.
Yes.
Are using them?
Wait. I'm not sure
Okay, it's an OMB program for software development.
It's a certification program.
It's reviewing the status, monitoring, scheduling of development of software like this. And I'm just curious, you're not familiar with, so you're apparently not using it. And OMB has been recommending to the IT department that they should be using this, and it sounds like you're not using it. The other thing that I think in answer back to Congressman Murphy's comment, I didn't hear you use the term IV&V for independent verification and validation as a way to check for issues as you go. Are you using IV&V?
I'll ask the technical team.
Okay, so if you've opted, it's pretty incredible. So if you've opted without having other costs incurred, I'm going to do this in-house, even though if again the GAO has said that they've rattled off this list in their report. Department of Defense canceled their contract 5 years after spending billions of dollars. Homeland Security, they've canceled that contract after $1 billion. Veterans Affairs, I could go on and on. There's real questions of whether or not our IT is capable of writing the kinds of specifications to put these things back out in the software. And that apparently they seem to be recommending that we consider using outsourcing. And I don't hear, you've already acknowledged you had no idea what the outsourcing cost could be, but you decided to do it in-house.
No, we are outsourcing this work.
I thought you said you were doing it with 8 people on your staff.
We of course have internal staff, but we're also outsourcing the work using modular contracting strategies, agile development. That's what we intend to do.
If you're at, because what do we have? I'm running out of time here. So in the future, if this has been going on for 3 years, where are we going to be able to get some monitoring of this to see some mileposts that we're getting something done in a time frame, and how the costs are being incurred with this? Where's the transparency that we were supposed to have?
We are prepared to be very transparent.
In 3
we
years,
talked about the initial.
We haven't got it yet.
Pardon me?
This is the first report we've heard from you in 3 years.
I'm happy to report to the committee as they see fit on progress throughout the development.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, if a state has not delegated enforcement of Subtitle C, what is the requirement on the manifest once it's been verified by the disposer?
I'm sorry, Mr. Flores, could you please repeat the question?
Yes, if a state has not delegated enforcement of Subtitle C, what is the requirement on a manifest once it is verified by the disposer?
I think I'll have to get back to you.
Okay.
I hesitate to respond under the record on a complex state authorization issue, so I will get back to you on that.
Ask you to provide that answer for the record. And can you give the subcommittee a specific list of items that need to be done in their timelines so that we can understand what stands between now and the system being fully operational?
Absolutely. So our first task that we're going to be focusing on between now and next spring is developing the core software system that we refer to as a minimum viable product. And this is going to focus on the software functionality that occurs around the receiving facility, the designated facility, the TSD. And we will develop basic security infrastructure, basic user authentication. We're going to be using our electronic signature protocols in that verification. Have it so that the TSD can receive information and send out information, confirming the receipt of the waste. So that's our first core comprehensive deliverable following what we developed in September. Then, following this spring, we'll be building out additional pieces of the system. So we have to have a paper tracking system. We have to develop APIs, application programming interfaces for our states. We have to have user interfaces that we have to develop for the system, data handling systems, that sort of thing. And then we have to, as I said, grow the ability of the system to operate with a much larger bandwidth than we will in the development cycle. So those are examples of some of the things that we have to do down the road.
Okay, and what's the, in terms of the rulemaking, what's the status of fee setting for system users?
So we are in the final stages of clearing what we refer to as our fee rule. That will be, we expect to be proposed early next year. And in that rule, we're going to lay out the structure of our fee collection system.
Okay. Thank you for your responses. I'll look forward to the answer to the first question.
Yes.
For the record. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing today, which is allowing us to be updated on the implementation of this important program. Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here and sharing your testimony. My first question for you is, has the EPA determined how e-manifest will apply to hazardous waste shipments by rail?
We have not fully determined that. Of course, there is an existing electronic system that's used to track the movement of hazardous materials under DOT's program. We've been talking to the rail industry, and we are well aware that we have to develop some linkages with their existing system.
Well, I appreciate that. There is a tremendous amount of this waste, as my understanding, is shipped by rail, so I think it'd be important that we include that. My next question is, how will EPA strive to protect the legitimate confidential business information reported as part of this system, as the e-manifest system? Yeah,
this has been an issue for us, and one that we grappled in our 1 year rule. And our EPA's thinking at the is that one of the, I think, key tools that we're going to be using to handle confidential business information is that, other than the parties that are directly involved in the transaction, we're going to have a 90-day delay period before we make the manifest information publicly available. EPA's made a determination that we don't believe that generally manifest information is CBI, but we do know that it has important commercial value. So we think that by delaying the time between when the transaction occurs and its publication for the broader public to see, that will help ameliorate any concerns that have been raised in this regard.
I appreciate it. Could you just help me understand, just more broadly, sort of what are the issues that arose that caused this delay in the time frame? Just help me understand why it's taking so long.
Yeah, absolutely. So when the law was passed, EPA immediately had a sense of urgency about building the system. The very first thing that we did is we went out and there was really one of two silver bullets that had to be come forward if we were going to meet this 3-year deadline. We were either going to find a vendor out there that had an existing system that we could basically take and adapt. So we went out and we talked to Amazon, to the Postal Service, to FedEx, and all of the people that you think naturally, and we all know, have software systems that are out there that do kind of what eManifest is intended to do. All of those companies came back to us and said, look, we're in the package movement business, we're in the retail business, we're not in the software sales business. This is part of our intellectual property, and we're not selling it to anybody. So that was a dead end for us. The other thing that we had hoped was a thought that had been part of the legislation, which is a share in savings, share in revenue, or other strategies for intellectual property sharing with people so that we could kind of get going. We pursued that. The legislation, as it was finally passed, didn't have the full authority for that, particularly with the appropriations coming through, having to be, come through every year. So that was not something that we could work on. Once we sort of got to the bottom of those two things through pretty extensive conversations with the vendor communities out there, we said we're going to have to do this through we're going to have to hire contractors and use this agile modular contracting strategy to get this done. So that's really, I think, one of the biggest reasons why we are where we are today. Was we really tried to pursue these silver bullets. They didn't work out. Now we're on a track using what all the research says is the most cost-effective, efficient way to build IT systems.
All right. One final question. What did you learn from September's initial demonstration of the system? Did it meet your expectations? Why or why not?
Absolutely, yeah. It certainly met our expectations. We were really pleased with the outcome. I think we learned a number of things. One of the things is we learned how useful our user community is in identifying errors. They were not shy about telling us when we had mistakes and errors and things that we need to correct. We immediately went in, and through the sprints that you go through in the agile development process, we're able to get this feedback and fix the software on a real-time basis. So that was one of the things that we learned. We learned we needed a data model. and we need to do a little bit better explanation of our system and how it operates. So a little bit more communication when we put these modules out to get the private sector to react to and use and try to interface with their systems.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time's expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time, and just a point, too, that wasn't really discussed. One of the big issues, the reason why we wanted to do this was the storage. Can you remember all the paper that's stored in file cabinets and buildings for this documentation? So there was a desire to get it digitally stored. So I know that's all part of the process. Seeing no other members wishing to ask any questions, I want to remind Mr. Johnson that the hearing record will remain open for 10 legislative days for anyone else that may submit a follow-up question. And we want to thank you for coming, and we will call this hearing adjourned.
Want this? I got one of those.